Sometimes an invention comes along that changes the world. But what if I told you about one that did it twice? That's what we're talking about today. The story of one guy, one little problem, and a solution that just kept on echoing through time.
So, how is that even possible? How does one person, just trying to fix one thing, accidentally kick off two global revolutions? That's the puzzle of James Watt. He had no idea he was building our modern world. He was just trying to solve a really specific engineering headache. And in the process, well, he laid the groundwork for two completely different industrial ages.
All right, let's set the scene. The year is 1765. We're over at the University of Glasgow. And there's this guy, James Watt. He's a mathematical instrument maker. So think of him as a super skilled craftsman, not some famous professor or rich inventor. He's the guy you go to when your fancy equipment breaks. And one day, he gets handed what seems like a pretty routine repair job. Basically, a professor comes to him and says, hey, this thing isn't working right, fix it. And this thing is a model of a Newcomen steam engine. Now, you gotta understand these early engines were kind of the workhorses of their day. Their main job? Pumping water out of flooded coal mines. But, and this is a big but, they had a massive flaw. So Watt, being the meticulous guy he was, starts studying this machine. And it doesn't take him long to figure out the problem. This engine was an absolute glutton for energy. It was chugging down a ridiculous amount of steam, but barely putting out any real power. So the big question became, why?
Okay, so here's the deal. The Newcomen engine had just one chamber that did everything. So first, you shoot hot steam in to push a piston up. Then, immediately after, you blast that same chamber with cold water to create a vacuum and pull the piston down. Think about that for a second. It's like trying to boil water in a pot that you keep throwing ice into. Every single cycle, you're wasting a ton of energy just reheating the chamber you just made cold on purpose. It's incredibly inefficient.
And that realization, that was his big aha moment. The story is, the whole idea just clicked for him while he was out for a walk one Sunday. He realized the problem wasn't the steam, it was the process. All that precious heat, all that energy was being thrown away just to warm the chamber back up again, over and over. And his solution? It was brilliant. Just brilliantly simple. He called it the separate condenser. The idea was, what if we have two chambers? The main one, where the piston is, stays hot all the time. Always hot. Then, after the steam pushes the piston, a valve opens and the steam rushes into a second, separate chamber. That's the one you keep cold. Suddenly, all that wasted energy is gone. Problem solved. This wasn't some grand scientific discovery about the laws of the universe. It was a really clever, really practical fix to an engineering problem. But that one technological tweak, oh man, it was about to unleash a whole new era. Because that one little improvement unlocked one thing above all else: power. I mean, raw, unbelievable power on a scale nobody had ever seen before. Up until then, the world ran on muscle power, or maybe wind and water if you were lucky. Watt's engine, this was a whole different beast. And this kicked off this incredible domino effect. Think about it. Watt's new efficient engines could pump water out of even the deepest coal mines. That meant a flood of cheap coal, which solved England's fuel crisis. And what do you do with all that cheap coal? Well, you use it to fuel even more steam engines. And since these engines could be built anywhere, not just next to a river, you could suddenly have factories and mass production on a massive scale. And just like that, the first industrial revolution was off to the races. Now, you'd think that's the end of the story, right? Invent the engine that powers the Industrial Revolution, pretty good legacy. But this is where things get really interesting. See, Watt had another, completely different problem to solve, and his solution to that problem planted a tiny seed for a second revolution, one that wouldn't really sprout for almost 200 years. So, okay, he's built this incredibly powerful machine, but now there's a new challenge. For a factory, you don't just need power, you need steady power, you need reliability. The engine's speed was all over the place, and he needed a way to keep the flow of steam constant. And his solution was another stroke of pure genius. It's called the centrifugal governor, and it's just this beautiful, simple, self-regulating device. Picture this. You've got two weights spinning around. If the engine gets too much steam and speeds up, the weights spin faster and fly outwards. That motion closes the steam valve a little bit, which slows the engine down. And if the engine slows down too much, the weights drop, opening the valve to let more steam in. It's perfect. What he'd done really was give his engine a brain, a little mechanical brain. He had created a system that could check on itself and fix its own mistakes automatically, constantly, with no human touching it. It's what we'd now call a feedback loop, built right into the machine. And by building that, he basically invented the core idea of automation. A machine that can regulate itself. He couldn't possibly have known how huge that concept would eventually become. So when you lay it all out, you really see the two paths. His first big invention, the separate condenser in 1765, that was all about raw power. It kicked off the first industrial revolution right away. But then, years later, you have the centrifugal governor. Just a clever little device to solve a nagging problem. And that little device planted the seed for the second industrial revolution, the age of automation, a seed that wouldn't fully grow for nearly 2 centuries, leading right up to the automated factories we see today. And here's the crazy part. Watt lived a long life. He saw the world completely transformed by his steam engine. He saw the first revolution in full swing. But he had no idea, not a clue, that his little spinning governor device was the great-great-grandfather of a second revolution that was still way off in the future. And that right there is the incredible legacy of James Watt. It just goes to show you, sometimes you set out to solve one small practical problem, and you end up changing the world in ways you could never, ever predict. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What problems are we solving today? And what accidental revolutions might we be starting right now?